Welcome back to Investing Talk Podcast. Today, we're taking a focused look at Flagstar Financial. We've got a pile of information here, and our job is to sort of unpack what's most important for you right now with this company.
That's right. We have a due diligence report, fresh as of today, April 25th, 2025, plus recent news company overview stuff. The aim is to pull out the key takeaways for you, the listener. We'll cover the financials, where they sit in the market, management, and what's happening literally today because, well, their Q1 earnings just dropped.
Okay, let's get right to the financials then. Money first. For the full year 2024, Flagstar brought in about $2.58 billion in revenue.
And what's notable is they've shown pretty steady growth in assets and loans. Like over the last 3 to 5 years, they hit $100.2 billion in total assets by the end of 2024. So that expansion, it seems real.
But then we look at Q1 2025. The estimate is what, around $509.6 million in revenue?
That's the estimate. And here's where it gets, well, a bit more complicated. The Q1 2025 earnings per share estimate is actually negative, minus $0.28 per share.
Oof, negative $0.28. That suggests a recent dip, or maybe even a loss compared to how they've been doing.
It definitely raises a flag.
Yeah.
Makes you ask, what's driving that specific number?
We don't have the current PE ratio right in front of us, but that's always a key one to watch, especially comparing it to the industry, which usually sits around 10 to 15 times earnings.
Correct. And looking at their leverage, stockholders' equity was $8.2 billion against that $100.2 billion in assets end of last year. So that works out to a leverage ratio of roughly 12 to 1. That's pretty typical for a bank.
Typical, okay.
Although it's worth mentioning, the report notes their Tier 1 capital ratio is running a little bit below their peer group average. So, context matters there.
Good point. And specific things like free cash flow or return on equity, we don't have those specific numbers here.
No, but you can always dig into the SEC filings for that level of detail if you really want to get granular.
So to understand these numbers better, what does Flagstar actually do?
Right. They're a regional bank, strong footing in the Northeast and Midwest historically, but they've been making moves, expanding into the Southeast and the West Coast. Got over 400 branches now.
And they also have those private banking teams, right, for wealthier clients?
They do. And that combination is interesting, spreading out geographically while also focusing on that private banking niche. It potentially diversifies their customer base.
And they have a pretty large deposit base, too.
Yep. $75.9 billion in deposits. So they're a solid regional force, maybe not, a coast-to-coast giant, but definitely significant in their markets.
Okay, but how does this fit into the bigger banking world right now? Because the sector has faced some pressures.
It has. The regulatory environment is still, let's say, demanding. Ever since the financial crisis, really. That means ongoing costs for compliance.
Right. That eats into profits.
And interest rates, of course. Changes there directly hit how much banks make from lending money out.
Plus the constant need to spend on tech, digital banking, all that.
Absolutely. So all these external factors could be playing a role in that Q1 EPS estimate we saw.
Okay, let's talk leadership. Who's running the show?
The main names you'll hear are CEO Joseph M. Otting and CFO Lee Smith. They're usually the ones on the earnings calls. Otting's been there a bit, has experience from other financial institutions.
And there was a recent appointment, something about private banking.
Yes. Mark Pittsey is now the head of private banking and wealth management. That could signal, maybe, a renewed push into that area. Often higher margins there.
Makes sense. Insider trading? Anything jump out?
Nothing immediate in our notes, but again, that's info you can typically track down through SEC Form 4 filings if you're curious about who's buying or selling internally.
Got it. What about valuation metrics like price to book?
Don't have the current PB today, but for banks, you sometimes watch that if it dips below 1. Some people see that as the market potentially undervaluing the assets on the books.
And things like dividend yield or beta, the volatility measure.
Also not in this immediate snapshot. But thinking about risks. Well, for any bank, especially one with a $69 billion loan portfolio like Flagstar.
Credit risk is always top of mind, people not paying back loans.
That's the big one. Plus, as we mentioned, those ongoing risks from interest rate shifts and the regulatory climate, those affect the whole sector.
Anything specific to Flagstar, though? Like major lawsuits or supply chain issues hitting them particularly?
Nothing major reported recently in the sources we reviewed, no. Seems relatively quiet on that front.
Okay, so how do they stack up size-wise? You said regional, but significant.
Yeah, with around $100 billion in assets, they're sort of mid-sized in the grand scheme of regional banks. Not playing in the same league as, say, a JP Morgan Chase, obviously,
Hmm.
but much bigger than your average local community bank.
And their growth has seemed stable, revenue-wise at least.
The top line, yeah. But again, that Q1 EPS estimate suggests some near-term turbulence, maybe.
What's interesting is you mentioned no recent major M&A or scandals. That sometimes points to just a period of keeping the ship steady.
Could be. And when you compare them to some competitors, like M&T Bank, they're around $200 billion in assets, or KeyBank, about $190 billion. Flagstar holds its own regionally.
They did some rebranding recently too, didn't they? Maybe trying to boost that recognition against those bigger players.
Possibly, yeah, sharpening the brand image.
Okay, now the really timely part. Today, April 25th, earnings day.
This is it. They were scheduled to release their Q1 2025 results at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. So they're out now. And there's a conference call happening at 8 a.m. Eastern with Otting and Smith.
And analysts were expecting that negative EPS, the negative $800.28, and revenue around $509.6 million.
That was the consensus, yes. So the actual numbers, and just as importantly, what management says on that call about why the numbers are what they are and what they see ahead, that could really move the stock today.
So the key question for you listening is, did they meet those expectations, beat them, or fall short? And what's the story behind it?
Exactly. Any recent wobbles in the stock price have likely been tied to this anticipation. Good news, or even just less bad than feared news, could give it a bump. Bad news, well, the opposite.
So let's try to wrap this up. Flagstar Financial, a significant regional bank, growing assets over time.
But facing what looks like some immediate headwinds, judging by that Q1 estimate, today's earnings release is really critical for understanding how they're navigating things right now.
And for you, this is a great sort of real-time example. You can see how the financial numbers, the industry trends, management moves all come together.
It really paints a picture of the company's health and maybe its direction.
Which leads to that important question for your own thinking. When you look at a regional bank, what metrics, what news items do you focus on most? What tells you the story?
Good question to ponder. And if you want to dig deeper yourself.
You can check out Flagstar's investor relations website. That's usually ir.flagstar.com.
Or look up their filings on the SEC's EDGR database. Financial data platforms like Morningstar or Bloomberg will have tons of numbers too.
Well, thanks for joining us for this look at Flagstar Financial.
We hope this gave you a clearer picture and some things to think about, especially on a day like today for the company.
If you found this useful, we'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe, maybe give us a like, or leave a comment.
It really does help us keep bringing you this kind of analysis. Thanks for listening.